Hey, my name is Ellen and I make guitar tutorials right here on YouTube, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my top tips and tricks on how to transition chords, specifically from C to G. So let's go ahead and zoom in and we can get started. Alright, so we're going to start with the traditional fingering for a C chord, which looks like this. So basically all I want you to do is go ahead and put your C chord on, and whenever we're transitioning from this C to our traditional fingering for G, here's my top trick, is to have a focus finger. So what I mean by that is you want to move one finger first before you have the others follow, and if you practice enough, that will become muscle memory. So for this C chord, what you want to do is take your middle finger and aim it right here above where your ring finger is. What that does is it creates an uncomfortable stretch here between your middle and your first finger, and so your hand is naturally going to want to kind of relieve that stress by doing this, and that's perfect for what you want to do. You can notice my first finger, when I move it close, my wrist also pops out. That's something you want to do for a G chord as well, okay? So again, the first thing you want to do is have your middle finger, reach it up here above on the low E string, above your ring finger. Relieve that tension from that first finger by moving your wrist back, and from here your other two fingers follow. Okay, so your pointer finger's on the second fret here of the A string and your ring finger's on the third fret here of the high E string. This is also twofold. The other reason why I think this is a good way to transition is because your middle finger is the first finger that you're putting down, and this is really important because your middle finger, that is what's covering that root note. So whenever you're playing a G chord, this low E string that's what the G note is coming from. So whenever you're building chords, you always want to build from the bottom or the low E string to the top or the high E string. When you strum from the top down. So it makes sense to make sure to cover those root notes first. And so now from G to C, same thing, you want to have a focus finger. So I would recommend your ring finger. You again want to aim this to be right below your middle finger on the third fret of that A string. And now you want to cradle your neck of your guitar again, and that will allow your other two fingers to go where they need to for that C chord. Alright, so again, from G to C, your focus finger is your ring finger. You go right here underneath your middle, and then cradle the guitar, and that will naturally have your two other fingers follow suit like this. Alright? And again, just to reiterate, if we do our ring finger first on that C chord, that is the root of our C chord. So again, you always want to build from the bottom up. Now, something else to remember is that whenever you are building these chords, if you're a beginner, it's really great if you are putting them down one at a time. However, that will eventually impede any sort of progress that you'll see with the speed of your transitions. So my other tip is to make sure to try to put all your fingers down at the exact same time whenever you're practicing these transitions, okay? And then the last thing I wanted to tell you was make sure not to lift your fingers too far above the fretboard. So if you watch really great guitarists, you'll see that their fingers on their left hand barely seem like they move at all. It's because they can do it really fast and they do those really minor motions. So whenever you're transitioning, do not lift all your fingers up and then do it. That gives you a big room for margin of error for like putting your fingers down on the wrong spot, okay? So just make that as minute of a little motion as you can. All right, now if you're in a pinch to learn a song for whatever reason, and this C traditional with G traditional fingering is just so hard for you, and you don't have enough time to practice it, something you can do to make it a little easier on yourself is you can go from your C chord fingered like this to a G chord that's like this. So your ring finger's on the third fret of the low E, your middle finger's on the second fret of the A, and then your pinky is here on the third fret of the high E. Alright, so that also makes a G chord. But if you use these three fingers, it makes that transition just a little bit easier. So from your C, all you have to do is take your ring and middle finger, move them up one string, and then put your pinky down. Alright, so C, G. So that's one option. And another thing you can do is you can substitute a C for a C add 9, which looks like this. And this is kind of an easier transition as well. So if you play C add 9 like this, you can go and move your first and second finger or your pointer and middle finger up one string, and that's a G. These do sound a little bit different than your open C and G chords. However, it does make for a easy transition if you're in a pinch. All right, guys, and those are some of my top tips for making that C to G and G to C chord transition a little bit easier on yourself. Now, I did talk about having focus fingers. My focus fingers are my ring finger and my middle finger for these two particular chords. But if you're somebody who already has learned these chords and you've already been working on those transitions and you have different focus fingers or fingers that you move first, go ahead and just stick with whatever you've been practicing. As long as you're consistent about it and practice it that way every time, you'll eventually develop that muscle memory that's needed in order to make that quick transition. Now, before I leave you, I wanted to quickly talk about the process of learning to transition chords and my advice on that. So the first thing is, before you even practice, going back and forth, the first thing you need to do is make sure that your fingers on your left hand are actually able to stretch far enough to form those chord shapes. I've seen a lot of beginners who try to do a G chord and they've literally have not developed the dexterity needed to make this long stretch. So if you can't form that chord comfortably yet, don't worry about transitioning. First, just make sure that you can comfortably put this shape down. Same with your C chord. The next thing to do is to work on muscle memory. So muscle memory is just basically like when you don't really have to actively think about anything and your fingers just do what you want them to do. One way to do this is whenever you have your chord shape down on your guitar, you want to visualize what your hand should look like for that next chord. So for instance, if I have the G shape down like this, before I even attempt to strum a C chord, I want to think about where all of those fingers should go and then put them all down at once, like I said earlier. You want to practice this and you want to visualize this and kind of prepare ahead of time before you start strumming. So again, before you practice, speeding up the transition, you have to be able to put all your fingers down at once and you have to have that muscle memory in place. So visualize your chord shapes every time you're about to practice. And then once you can do all of those things, the last step is to add a metronome and speed up practicing those transitions. Now, in my experience, there are a lot of people who don't know how to use a metronome properly, or sometimes they think that they're using it properly, but they really aren't. So what I've done is made a practice with me exercise video where you can actually play through and we will go through this C to G transition, and all you have to do is play with me for a few minutes every single day and I promise you will see those improvements. So if you are interested in practicing with me on the C to G transition, I do have that video right here. I will link it in this little iCard that'll pop up. It'll also be in the description below this video and in a pinned comment. So lots of places to find me, but go ahead and go here next and we can practice this transition together. Good luck and thanks for watching.